Ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you a question. What do you think happens when you reject a man and then choose to stay silent afterward? You might think, oh, I'm just giving him space, or I don't want to make things awkward. But let me tell you, your silence after his rejection is doing something to him that you may not even realize, something far more powerful than you think. Imagine this. He's sitting there feeling confused, rejected, and maybe even a little embarrassed. And in the silence, it's like a storm is raging in his mind. He's wondering why you're not saying anything, questioning everything about himself, and trying to figure out what went wrong. You might think the silence will make everything go away, but it's actually killing him bit by bit. Stick with me, because you're about to find out why your silence after his rejection is so much more impactful than you can imagine, and why it's not as harmless as you think. When you stay silent after rejecting a man, you're unknowingly placing him in a space of deep uncertainty. You see, rejection is already a painful experience, but it's the silence that follows that makes it feel like a never-ending cycle of self-doubt. A man's mind, after being rejected, goes into overdrive. He begins to replay every conversation, every smile, every word that was exchanged, desperately trying to figure out where things went wrong. His thoughts spiral into a chaotic loop of self-questioning, wondering if he did something to cause the rejection or if it was something he overlooked. The silence, instead of providing closure or a chance for understanding, leaves him floating in confusion, unsure of how to proceed or what to make of the situation. In relationships, communication is vital, but when silence takes over, it sends a message that is far more potent than any words you might speak. Silence creates a void, a gap that needs to be filled. And for him, that gap is filled with questions. Was it something he said? Was he too forward or not forward enough? Did he come across as too needy or maybe too distant? A man who is rejected and left in silence will likely scrutinize every action he made during your interactions, trying to pinpoint exactly where things started to go wrong. The longer the silence persists, the more intense these thoughts become. They breed insecurity, and with every passing day without communication, that insecurity grows. In the absence of your words, his imagination will work overtime. He starts to overthink your behavior, trying to dissect it for any hidden meanings. The silence forces him into a mental corner where he is alone with his thoughts. And those thoughts, if unchecked, can lead to some pretty destructive conclusions. Instead of finding peace, he's left trying to figure out what went wrong with no clear answers. And this uncertainty eats at him, making the emotional pain of rejection even more intense. It's important to understand that people crave clarity, especially in emotionally charged situations. When you reject a man and then remain silent, you're not giving him any opportunity to understand your perspective. He doesn't know if he did something to upset you or if you've just lost interest. You may think that silence is your way of moving on, but to him, it's a punishment. It's like being stranded on an emotional island, unable to reach any resolution. Without your input, he's left to fill in the blanks, often imagining the worst case scenarios. This constant state of emotional questioning can make him feel even worse than he did when the rejection first occurred. Additionally, silence makes a man feel like he's invisible. When you're not responding to him, he starts to believe that he doesn't even matter enough for you to acknowledge his feelings. He wonders if you ever really valued the connection between you, or if the rejection has made you completely disregard his presence. Silence, in this case, communicates indifference. The absence of words, the lack of interaction, makes him question whether he was ever important to you at all. What he really needs after rejection is some form of communication, even if it's not the outcome he hopes for. Something as simple as a "let's talk," or "I need some time" can help provide him with the closure he desperately needs. The longer you stay silent, the more toxic this mental cycle becomes for him. Every day that passes without any word from you can feel like an emotional roller coaster. His mind might shift between hope and despair, sometimes feeling like he might be able to make things right, and other times thinking that he's lost for good. This constant emotional flopping leaves him feeling emotionally drained and unable to move on. Now, it's not to say that silence can never be an effective tool in certain situations. Sometimes it's necessary for space or healing. However, after rejection, silence doesn't serve as an act of self-preservation or independence. It serves to deepen the wound. A man's pride may prevent him from reaching out to you first, but deep down, he wants to know why things went the way they did. He needs some form of acknowledgement, even if it's just to affirm that he's not invisible to you. When silence stretches on for too long, it also diminishes any sense of respect he might have had for you. You may think you're helping him move on, but what you're really doing is leaving him in limbo, questioning whether he was ever worthy of an honest conversation in the first place. When you're silent, you're inadvertently reinforcing the idea that you don't owe him an explanation, and that can be a painful blow to someone who once thought they mattered. So, the next time you reject someone, consider the impact of your silence. While it may feel like the easiest way to avoid discomfort, it may be the thing that haunts him the most. Instead of leaving him to struggle in silence, try offering some form of closure, even if it's brief. It may not change the rejection, but it will at least give him the clarity he needs to move forward with less emotional baggage. Your words, no matter how small, could help him heal and regain his sense of self-worth. Silence may seem harmless, but in the realm of human emotions, it can be a far more damaging force than you ever intended. Rejection can hit a man hard, especially when he has genuine feelings for you. But what happens when you add silence to the equation? The silence that follows rejection often stirs up emotions he's not ready to face. You see, men, like anyone else, have egos that they protect. Their pride is a big part of their identity, and when that's challenged, it can leave them feeling fragile and vulnerable. While it may seem like they're able to brush things off, the truth is it's the silence that cuts deeper than the rejection itself. When you stay silent after rejecting him, you're amplifying the emotional blow, and that can make him feel worse than he already does. He may feel inadequate or like he's failed to meet your expectations, and this leads him to experience a deep sense of regret. A man's ego isn't something that can be easily fixed or ignored. After rejection, especially if he truly cared about you, his pride takes a hit. He starts to wonder if he was too forward, too aggressive, or even too needy. It's not just about the rejection itself. It's about the fear that maybe he wasn't good enough, or that he wasn't the person you thought he was. The silence only worsens these feelings because without any communication from you, he's left to his own thoughts. And more often than not, those thoughts aren't kind. He may replay everything in his mind, scrutinizing the smallest details of your interactions. Did he say the wrong thing? Was his approach too intense? Did he miss the signals that you weren't interested? It's an emotional minefield that he's now navigating alone. And in that isolation, he'll likely come to conclusions that only fuel his regret. The absence of your voice means there's no one to reassure him, no one to remind him that rejection is a part of life, and no one to help him understand that his worth isn't defined by this one moment. He's left with the idea that maybe he just wasn't enough. It's a damaging thought that sticks with him long after the rejection occurs. Instead of finding a way to heal and move on, he's stuck in the aftermath of what he perceives as a failure. Silence keeps him trapped in a cycle of overthinking, making it harder for him to bounce back from the hurt. If he can't get answers or clarification from you, his mind will continue to play tricks on him, and that self-doubt will continue to fester. Every time he tries to move forward, he'll be reminded of the rejection and the silence that followed it, like an emotional scar that never heals. This is where the deeper impact of silence becomes clear. You see, men don't often ask for validation directly, but they do need it. They need to know that they're seen, that their feelings matter, and that the rejection doesn't define them as less than they are. But when you don't say anything, that validation never comes. The silence leads him to think that he wasn't even worthy of an explanation, and that hits his pride hard. It makes him feel as if he's not deserving of a real conversation, and that's where his regret deepens. Regret can be a powerful emotion, but it's not always about the action itself. More often than not, it's about the perceived missed opportunity, the chance to prove himself, to show you he could have been the man you needed. When you're silent, that opportunity feels further out of reach. He may wonder if he could have done things differently, if he could have shown you more of who he really is. And in that space of regret, he's constantly asking himself, what if? The regret isn't just about the rejection, it's about the lost chance. He could have been more patient, more attentive, or maybe even better at reading the situation. But the silence leaves him with no way to know if any of those efforts would have made a difference. It's a painful thought that constantly nags at him, leaving him stuck in his own head, reliving the moment again and again. And while this might seem like just a passing phase for a man who genuinely cared, this internal battle can linger far longer than the rejection itself. It's important to recognize that rejection is tough on everyone. It chips away at confidence, it tests self-worth, and it leaves the person questioning their value. For men, their ego is often the last line of defense against these feelings of inadequacy. Rejection challenges that defense, and silence is like adding salt to an open wound. Without any reassurance from you, his regret grows, and so does his sense of defeat. It's not just about what happened between you, it's about how he's now viewing himself in the wake of that silence. So, while you might think silence is a way to protect yourself or give space, remember that it's doing more harm than good. It leaves him in a place of emotional limbo where his regret is amplified and his self-worth is questioned. Silence doesn't help him heal. It keeps him trapped in the aftermath of rejection with no way to move forward. To heal from rejection, a man needs clarity, understanding, and sometimes just a simple acknowledgement that he's not defined by that moment. Without that, the regret lingers and his ego continues to suffer. When you leave a man in silence after rejecting him, it doesn't just make him feel bad about the situation. It can actually make him feel invisible. You might not realize this, but rejection and the absence of communication from you send a message that he is not important enough to deserve a response, or that his feelings don't matter. Even though rejection itself is painful, the silence that follows can be even more damaging. A man's self-esteem and sense of value are often tied to how he perceives his worth in the eyes of others, especially someone he cares about. When you don't acknowledge him after the rejection, he starts to feel like he doesn't even exist in your world anymore. It's a blow to his confidence and makes him question whether he mattered to you at all. For many men, the idea of being acknowledged or validated is essential. Men want to feel that their feelings, their efforts, and their presence are recognized and valued. When they're left in silence after a rejection, it's as if they've been erased from your life, and that can trigger feelings of worthlessness. He'll start wondering if he was ever truly seen by you, or if he was just a passing figure in your life. This feeling of invisibility doesn't just hurt, it lingers, and it can take a toll on his emotional well-being. He might start doubting not only his relationship with you, but also his worthiness of any kind of affection or attention in the future. It's not just about the rejection anymore. It's about how that silence makes him feel like he doesn't matter. And while you may think silence is a way to protect both yourself and him, it can actually create a deeper sense of isolation for him. Instead of allowing him to process the rejection and move forward, you're unintentionally creating a void where his mind runs wild with assumptions. Men, like anyone else, need closure. They need to feel that they've been seen and heard, even if the situation didn't end the way they hoped. When there's no communication, he is left to fill in the gaps with his own thoughts, and more often than not, those thoughts aren't kind. He'll likely believe that you didn't care enough to explain, or that you don't see him as important enough to even address the situation. This, in turn, makes him feel even more invisible. You might be thinking, but he's the one who was rejected. Shouldn't he be the one who's struggling to move on? While that's partially true, the aftermath of rejection affects both people involved. The person who rejects often feels a sense of guilt or discomfort about the situation, but the one who's been rejected feels a different kind of pain, one of being disregarded or overlooked. When there's silence after rejection, it exacerbates this feeling, leading him to believe that he was never really seen or appreciated. Even if you don't intend for him to feel that way, the lack of response from you can create that emotional distance. He'll begin to feel like he's not worth the effort it would take for you to offer some form of closure or even a simple acknowledgement of his feelings. This feeling of invisibility doesn't just make him question your relationship, but it also makes him question his ability to connect with others in the future. He may start to believe that he's incapable of making a meaningful connection with someone, or worse, that he's just not enough. This self-doubt can echo into future relationships, leaving him more guarded and less likely to open up to someone else. The emotional damage caused by feeling invisible doesn't just go away. It stays with him, affecting how he views himself in every interaction moving forward. So what can you do to prevent this invisible, damaging emotional cycle? It's simple. Acknowledge his feelings. It's not about trying to fix things or tell him that things will be okay. It's about recognizing that his feelings are valid and important. By offering some kind of response, even if it's brief or indirect, you help him regain his sense of worth and prevent him from spiraling into negative self-reflection. It doesn't have to be a lengthy conversation, but offering him some clarity or even a simple acknowledgement of the situation can go a long way in helping him heal. He'll at least know that he's not invisible to you, that you see him as a person with feelings who deserves respect. Leaving him in silence doesn't just affect him emotionally in the moment. It can have a lasting impact on his ability to trust in others and in his own self-worth. When you make him feel like he doesn't matter enough to even warrant a response, you're unintentionally damaging his sense of value, and this damage can take time to heal. Silence may seem like the easy way out, but it often leaves deeper scars than you realize. Acknowledging his feelings, even with a few words, can help him find closure and move forward with a sense of dignity. In the end, it's not about how things ended, but how you made him feel along the way. When you treat him with the respect of acknowledging his feelings, you allow him to walk away with a sense of pride instead of carrying the heavy weight of invisibility. When a man faces rejection and is met with silence afterward, he often starts to overanalyze the situation, wondering what went wrong. This is not just a matter of the rejection itself, it's about the self-doubt that begins to creep in. He will start questioning everything he did, the words he said, and the way he approached the situation. This overthinking is a natural response to feeling rejected and abandoned. Silence in this scenario is like fuel to the fire. It exacerbates his internal struggle. The mind of a man, especially after facing rejection, can be a tumultuous place, and the absence of any form of communication only amplifies the feelings of uncertainty and confusion. In the absence of clarity, he starts creating stories in his head. He might think, was I too much? Was I not enough? Was I too forward? Did I say the wrong thing? These are questions that constantly circle around his mind, and the silence only heightens this cycle. The more he thinks, the more he digs himself into a hole of self-doubt. He begins to believe that something about him as a person, his character, or his approach was flawed. These negative thoughts can quickly spiral, leading him to feel unworthy and emotionally exhausted. The more he is left with no answers, the harder it becomes for him to move on from this feeling of failure. It's as if the rejection keeps playing in a loop in his mind, and the silence from you is only adding more fuel to that mental loop. When someone is rejected and left without communication, they are denied the opportunity to understand what happened, which only increases the confusion. A man who truly cares about you or who has feelings for you wants to understand why things didn't work out. He wants to know if it was something he did, something he said, or if it was simply that the connection wasn't there. Without this clarity, his mind will race through countless possibilities, many of which are likely to be harsh and unflattering to himself. This leads to him questioning his worth and trying to analyze every single detail of his interactions with you. He begins to doubt his ability to understand relationships and his self-worth as a whole. This internal battle isn't just about emotional turmoil. It also affects his confidence moving forward. Men who face rejection without closure often find it difficult to trust their own judgment in future relationships. The lingering self-doubt created by that one rejection can make him second guess every decision, every compliment, every move he makes. He may start to wonder if he's too emotional, too eager, or if he's simply not good enough. He might even feel like he can't approach women in the same way again, afraid of making the same mistake or feeling the same kind of hurt. Furthermore, this pattern of overthinking and self-doubt isn't just something that resolves itself quickly. It sticks with him. He'll carry that sense of confusion with him, sometimes for weeks, months, or even longer. The lack of communication from you leaves him hanging in emotional limbo, wondering whether he's ever going to get the answers or closure he needs to feel at peace. This feeling of being stuck is like a weight that he can't shake off. The emotional burden of rejection is heavy, but the burden of silence after rejection is even heavier. It holds him back from moving forward and keeps him focused on something that doesn't have any clear resolution. The silence you offer after a rejection doesn't just affect him in the moment. It also plants the seeds of insecurity that may not be easy to uproot. He might find it difficult to open up again to someone else, fearing that the same thing might happen to him. It becomes harder for him to trust in his own judgment, his ability to connect with others, and his belief that he deserves love or attention. It's an emotional chain reaction, and the longer the silence lasts, the stronger the chain becomes. His mind spins and spirals, and instead of healing from the rejection, he gets stuck in a loop of self-criticism, wondering where he went wrong. Eventually, the mental weight of all this overthinking can take its toll on his emotional health. The more he overthinks, the more disconnected he may feel from his own sense of self-worth. His confidence takes a hit, and it becomes more difficult for him to believe in his own value. It's not just about your rejection anymore. It's about how that rejection, coupled with the silence, leads him to question everything he knows about himself. And that's not something that can be easily repaired. To avoid this cycle of confusion and self-doubt, it's important to recognize that rejection is a natural part of life. But silence in the aftermath can create an unnecessary emotional burden. A man needs some form of closure, even if it's brief or indirect. Without that, he's left to wrestle with his own thoughts, trying to understand what went wrong and why he's been left in the dark. The silence doesn't allow him the opportunity to process, heal, and move on. Instead, it traps him in a state of overthinking and self-doubt, where the emotional damage becomes deeper and harder to overcome. Offering even a small acknowledgement or explanation after rejection can go a long way in preventing this cycle from starting in the first place. When a man is faced with rejection followed by silence, it's not just the immediate emotional pain he has to deal with, but the long-term effect on how he perceives himself and how he views relationships in the future. The silence after rejection can feel like a heavy weight on his heart, making him wonder if he will ever be able to emotionally recover. The more time passes without any communication from you, the more his mind starts to wander and he begins to feel like he wasn't just rejected, but that he was discarded. It's an isolating feeling, and it can leave him grappling with his own sense of identity and self-worth. The harsh truth is that silence after rejection can be a form of emotional abandonment. A man might understand that rejection is a part of life, but when the silence follows, he feels like his feelings don't matter enough to be addressed. The rejection alone is a blow to his ego and emotions, but when he's left without any acknowledgement, it amplifies his pain. He begins to feel as though he's not worth the time and effort to communicate with, and that's a hard pill to swallow. This is particularly true if the man had genuine feelings for you. The silence suggests that not only is he not worthy of your affection, but he might not even be worthy of basic human decency, like being treated with respect in a situation where his feelings are involved. This can trigger deeper emotional wounds, especially if he has already dealt with feelings of inadequacy in past relationships. The sense of abandonment can be even more acute if this man is someone who is used to being in control of his emotions or used to handling situations independently. For him, being rejected and left in silence can feel like a betrayal, not just from you, but from his own expectations of how things should have gone. When a man has invested emotionally in someone and opens himself up, he places a degree of trust in the relationship, and when that trust is met with silence, it can feel like a betrayal of his vulnerability. Men often put up walls to protect themselves from emotional pain, but when they lower those walls and allow themselves to truly care, the rejection becomes much harder to bear. Over time, the silence starts to erode his confidence. He begins to question his judgment and ability to read situations. Did he misinterpret your signals? Was he too eager, too intense, or simply not enough? His mind starts running through every interaction, dissecting every word and action, searching for clues on what went wrong. And when none of those clues appear, it only reinforces his feelings of inadequacy. The longer the silence continues, the more these thoughts intensify, leading him to feel like he has failed in some profound way. This spiraling self-doubt can affect not just his emotional state, but his behavior in future relationships as well. He may approach future interactions with hesitation, wondering if he should even allow himself to be vulnerable again. The impact of this silence also extends beyond the immediate emotional pain. It starts to seep into his interactions with others. He may become more guarded, less open to expressing his feelings, and more closed off emotionally. He will likely hesitate to open up to new people, fearing that the same thing will happen again. The emotional armor he builds as a defense mechanism can prevent him from connecting with others in a meaningful way. What was once a healthy, trusting, and open man becomes someone who carries the scars of rejection and silence, hesitant to engage in future relationships with the same level of emotional depth. He might even pull away from others, not just romantically, but in friendships or family dynamics, because he's unsure if his emotions will be met with the same disregard as before. And while this emotional shutdown might seem like an overreaction, it's important to understand that men, just like women, experience deep feelings, even if they don't always show them. The silence after rejection isn't just a neutral absence. It has an emotional impact. He may not outwardly show it, but inside he's struggling. This struggle comes from the deep sense of disconnection that silence creates. The longer he's left to stew in his thoughts, the harder it becomes to regain his sense of self-worth. It's not about the rejection itself, but the perceived abandonment that comes afterward. It's a feeling of being unseen, unimportant, and emotionally disposable. No one wants to feel that way. And when a man is left in the dark, it triggers a sense of emotional loneliness that can linger long after the initial rejection. What might seem like a small act of leaving him in silence can have ripple effects that last far longer than you might expect. His feelings of being disregarded can haunt him for weeks, months, or even years, especially if it's a pattern that he has experienced before. If a man has been rejected and left in silence multiple times throughout his life, it can compound his feelings of emotional abandonment, leading him to believe that this is simply the way relationships work, that he's just never going to be worthy of real, meaningful connections. This negative cycle can be incredibly difficult to break, and it takes time, healing, and emotional support to help him regain his confidence and trust in his own worth. In the end, silence after rejection is more than just a temporary pause. It's an emotional wound. For a man, the feeling of being rejected and left without any closure can shape how he views future relationships, his own self-worth, and his emotional state. It's essential to recognize the impact that silence can have on him, not just in the moment, but long after the rejection has passed. Offering some form of communication, even if it's brief, can prevent him from feeling discarded and invisible. It's about giving him the respect of acknowledgement, allowing him to process and heal from the rejection in a healthy way. This simple act of communication can make all the difference in how he moves forward emotionally. When silence follows a rejection, it's not just about what's happening in the present moment, but the long-term emotional effects that can significantly alter how a man views relationships in the future. For many men, the aftermath of rejection and the accompanying silence can make him question his value, not just in the eyes of the person who rejected him, but in his own eyes. It doesn't matter if he is outwardly strong or if he appears unaffected. Silence often has a much more profound impact on a man's emotional state than anyone might realize. That silence becomes a void that fills with self-doubt, fear, and confusion, and it carries the potential to leave scars that are much harder to heal. The feeling of being rejected and then left to process the rejection alone in silence is isolating. When there is no follow-up, no explanation, or no opportunity for dialogue, it leaves him with a sense of emotional abandonment. He's left without the clarity needed to understand what went wrong or why things didn't work out. All he's left with is a feeling that something is wrong with him, and it can be very difficult for him to move forward. That void created by silence becomes a breeding ground for negative self-talk, where he starts wondering if he's not good enough, not worthy of love, or if he'll ever find someone who will appreciate him for who he is. This kind of self-criticism can undermine his confidence and self-esteem, making it difficult for him to put himself out there emotionally in future relationships. Silence after rejection can also lead to an overwhelming sense of confusion and frustration. A man might try to reason with the silence, but without any answers, he can quickly start to feel like he's being kept in the dark. He might replay every word, every interaction, and every moment trying to figure out what went wrong, what he missed, and how he could have handled things differently. When there's no communication to provide closure, his mind is left to wander, creating a whirlwind of doubt and insecurity. He starts to question his ability to connect with others, and his fear of rejection deepens. It's not just the rejection itself that hurts, it's the inability to understand why it happened, which only makes the emotional wound harder to heal. One of the most detrimental effects of silence after rejection is the damage it does to a man's trust, not just in others, but in his own judgment. Men, like anyone, want to feel understood and valued, especially when they invest emotionally in a relationship. When they face rejection without any kind of follow-up, it undermines their ability to trust in their feelings and instincts. They might begin to wonder if they misinterpreted the situation, if they were too forward, or if they were just not good enough. This self-doubt can make it harder for him to move forward, even if he knows logically that the rejection was just a part of life. It affects how he views future relationships, causing him to second-guess himself, second-guess others, and become overly cautious with his emotions. He might even shy away from getting involved with anyone again, fearing the same painful outcome. Furthermore, this silence leads to an emotional spiral that can affect not only his romantic life, but also other aspects of his emotional well-being. Rejection followed by silence can lead to a lack of closure, which often leaves a man stuck in a place of emotional limbo. He's unable to process the rejection and move forward because his mind is still stuck on the question of what went wrong. Instead of finding peace, he's left with unresolved emotions that continue to affect his mood, his outlook on relationships, and even his day-to-day interactions with others. The emotional toll of this lingering sense of confusion and pain can make him feel disconnected from the world around him, and he might withdraw from social situations or isolate himself from friends and family. The rejection itself might have been temporary, but the emotional impact of silence can last far longer. A man who faces rejection and is met with silence is not only dealing with the immediate emotional fallout, but also with the long-term effects on his sense of self-worth. If this experience happens multiple times, it reinforces the belief that he's not worthy of love, respect, or attention. This pattern can form a cycle where each new rejection reinforces the negative feelings left by the previous one, making it more difficult for him to trust others and open himself up to future relationships. He may feel like he's doomed to fail emotionally, and his self-esteem becomes further damaged with each unanswered rejection. The silence doesn't just reinforce the fear of being rejected. It solidifies the idea that he is incapable of forming meaningful connections, which is a devastating belief to carry. The long-lasting effects of silence after rejection can also lead to emotional exhaustion. Over time, a man might get tired of trying to understand why things didn't work out or why he's being left without any form of communication. He might come to the conclusion that it's easier to close off emotionally, to stop trying to connect with others, and to stop being vulnerable altogether. He might even convince himself that it's better to avoid putting himself in situations where he could face more rejection. But this approach only adds to the emotional exhaustion. The more he isolates himself, the more disconnected he becomes from the things that bring him joy, and the harder it becomes for him to find fulfillment in his life. The longer he carries these feelings of rejection and abandonment without addressing them, the heavier they become, ultimately leaving him in an emotional rut. To avoid this painful cycle, it's important for those involved in the rejection process to offer some form of closure. Even if it's difficult, providing an explanation, a conversation, or simply acknowledging the situation can help him find peace and heal. Silence may seem like a harmless response, but it often has far-reaching effects that go beyond the immediate moment. It can leave a man with lingering feelings of confusion, hurt, and self-doubt, which can affect his emotional health for much longer than anyone might expect. Offering him the opportunity to understand the situation and process his emotions is an important step in helping him heal and move on in a healthy way.